Hello, dears. This is the StorySculpt channel, and you are listening to the story, The Malay Host. This story is taken from the book, A Pair of Jeans, by Qaisra Shahraz. Eyes on the crispy banknotes, Aziza Hammett tiptoed into the living room. Reaching the table, she grasped the woven jute money basket, pulled her shawl over it and turned. Then froze. From the doorway, Abdul's eyes chilled. Clutching the small basket against her chest, Aziza glared back. The sound of car wheels crunching to a stop on the gravel outside had her turning to the balcony window. Abdul Hammett took his chance and leapt forward, startling her and snatching the basket from her tight fist. Foreign banknotes fluttered down to their feet. Hissing abuse in Bahasa Malay, he squatted on the floor. "Kitchen," he ordered, grasping a handful of colorful notes with different motifs and numbers. Tearfully, Aziza stumbled out of the room and went down into her soot-stained hot kitchen and blazing cooking fire. Swiping her wet cheeks with the end of her shawl, Aziza watched, fascinated by the hungry flames licking the sooty, simmering aluminium pot of meat, ready to topple over and then obediently retreat as she lifted the lid. The slamming of the car door quickened Aziza's heartbeat. "It's now or never," she vowed, biting her quivering lower lip. "Ibrahim, Ibrahim," she softly called, tapping the creamy soot-plastered wall with the wooden cooking ladle. A burning log fell from the cooking fire, just missing her foot. Aziza stepped back, toppling the three-legged stool behind her and the Hessian bag propped on top, the rice grains spilling out of it onto the wooden floor. "This is it. The last straw," she shrieked under her breath. It had taken her weeks to nurse the other blistered foot. Grabbing the log from the floor, she left the kitchen by the other little door and went down the steps. Tall rubber and palm trees flanked the three sides of the house. Like many other rural Malay houses, it was built on a raised wooden platform, standing on 8 sturdy wooden stilts and overlooked the jungle. Turning the corner, Aziza called again. "Ibrahim." Ducking her head, she slid under the platform. At the front of the house, the passenger car door was slammed shut. Aziza crouched, hiding behind a stilt. The log with its one end glowing held tightly in her hand. Aziza glimpsed 2 pairs of sunburnt legs, the gravel crunching under their feet. They were the 7th lot of white legs entering her home today. The hairy ones belonged to a man dressed in blue knee-length shorts. The hem of the woman's floral country dress reached above her knees. Another pair of masculine denim-clad legs and brown feet slid in view. The thudding sound of movement in the room above made Aziza lift her head, heart still, lips parted. "Ibrahim." Aziza's hands shook, imagining the key turning. In the sunshine, the Tamil driver turned to his passengers. Wiping the sweat from his forehead with a cloth, he announced, "Sir, here we are for our next spot of sightseeing. A very special place. A Malaysian country house." He grinned with satisfaction, looking up at the quaint wooden building he visited daily. He loved both the house and the wily old host with his receding grease-scraped hair, gracious manners, and fantastic command of English. Marjorie and Robert, a retired couple on a tour of Southeast Asia, stared in awe at the black and white painted house, standing on a raised wooden platform. The facade was indeed impressive, with tall trees, mass of other foliage, and pots of colorful orchids and hibiscus bushes strategically lining the sides of the wooden steps leading up to the house. "It's a Malay version of a Welsh country cottage, Bob," Marjorie marveled, continuing to feast her eyes on the picturesque scene before them. "An opportunity to see a real Malaysian house. How enchanting." "Bob, how lucky we are." She smiled in delight. "Look," Robert nudged her on the arm. An elderly Malay man stood on the porch, smiling and beckoning for them to come up. Something was digging into Marjorie's heel. She bent down to remove her sandal. It was then her startled gaze leveled with that of Aziza's, squatting under the platform, half hidden behind the stilt. Marjorie smiled and waited. But the Malay woman didn't smile back. Instead, she treated her to a pointed, hostile stare. Disconcerted and the smile slipping from her face, Marjorie stood up to follow her husband into the house, whispering to him, "Bob, there is a woman hiding under the house." Their host stood in the middle of the room, a warm smile of welcome spread across his narrow face. "Salam. Welcome to my home, lady and gentlemen," he jovially began, charming them with his gentle accent. "Thank you," they echoed together, curiously looking around the large, tidy room. Its 4 wooden shuttered windows were thrown open, allowing a warm breeze to flow through the room. "It's as if we are standing on a raised platform in the middle of the jungle," Marjorie voiced in awe. The host's brown face split into a wider smile, his line of grayish-black mustache more pronounced, and gestured for them to sit down. Marjorie smiled her thanks as he gallantly drew out a chair for her, then suddenly sobered, remembering the woman down below. "This is my house," continued the Malay host, sitting down on another chair. "Please make yourself at home and feel free to look around." His European guests shyly let their eyes fan over the rows of graying sepia and black and white family portraits in glass frames hanging on the 2 walls. Getting up, their host proudly pointed to one picture of a young man in a military uniform. "This is me when I was young. And this, my mother. She got married at 15 and had me at 16, he explained, nervously laughing, expecting them to look surprised. "Come and look. It's all right." "You are welcome." Robert and Marjorie peered at the photographs. "Is this your wife?" "She's very beautiful, Mr. Dash," Marjorie asked, staring at the picture of a young woman dressed in traditional Malay clothes with a serene expression on her face. "I beg your pardon, madam." Color flooded his cheeks, making them a shade darker. "I haven't introduced myself properly. I am Abdul Hamid and you are." His eyes on Marjorie, the wide smile fixed firmly in place. "Marjorie, and this is my husband Robert," she volunteered, sitting down. Again, "Welcome to Malaysia, Marjorie and Robert. This house belonged to my father. That man there." He pointed to the portrait of another male. "He opened our home to the public 40 years ago. Since then we have had thousands of foreign visitors, thanks to this friend of ours. They come from all over the world." "Are you from the UK, madam?" "Yes, Wales actually." "Right, Madam Wales. Let me show you something special." He patted in his soft sandals to the far corner of the room. Robert and Marjorie turned to look. "This is our bridal dais, where the bride and groom sit together when they get married. Please, Madam Wales, would you like to sit on it and have a photograph taken with your husband?" He giggled, seeing her gaze drop. "You can pretend that you are a Malay bride. All my guests love having their photos taken in that corner. Come, madam, you must try it." He coaxed with his beaming smile. Exchanging a nervous glance with her husband, Marjorie got up, worried that the small thing, the swing seat, would not take both their weights. Robert sheepishly offered, "You sit down, Marge. I'll take the photo," and laughed, explaining to the host, "I don't think it will take us both, Mr. Hamid. We are big people, huh? We really don't want to break your family heirloom." Abdul Hamid openly giggled. "Yes, you Westerners are tall people. Probably your wife then." Marjorie gingerly squatted down on the cerise quilted satin padding of the dais under the attractive canopy drapes. Smoothing out her dress over her legs, Marjorie glanced up at their smiling host standing beside her, whilst Robert snapped away with his digital camera. "I wonder how many other foreign women have sat in this ridiculous position," she cattily echoed in her head. Their host, still with a smile, ushered them through a door leading to the rest of the house with the words, "Mind your head, you tall people." The Tamil driver remained behind at the table, reading a newspaper. A scraping sound against a door and a heavy grunt made Marjorie and Robert look expectantly at their host as they stood in the shadowy little hallway between 2 rooms, his smile slipping and his head turned the other way. Abdul Hamid explained in a low voice, "The room on the left is our private room, the only one we keep close to the public, where, as you will understand, my family, our women, can gain some privacy." He had now stepped into the other room on the right. "This is our bedroom. Come in, please." His eyes averted, Abdul Hamid stood beside a bed. There was a square wooden table with a cotton floral tablecloth and a chair. Another open door led out onto a balcony at the side of the house. Ducking their head to enter through the low door, Marjorie and Robert gently stepped on the polished wooden floor. This is our bridal bed. Used to be my parents'. Of course, it's a bit small. By your standards. He stopped as another thudding sound had his guests turning the other way. Behind them Aziza peeped from the door, half in and half out of the room. Marjorie stared. It was the woman from under the house. All three were looking at Aziza and the glare of her coal-black eyes, wanting to communicate her thanks for letting them into their home. Marjorie smiled. Abdul Hamit's fists tightened at his sides. This is my Aziza, he offered brightly, the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth but not quite reaching his eyes. She can't speak English, and went on to explain. Then abruptly turned his back on Aziza, signaling with his hand from behind his back to disappear. Ki, she hissed in her language. Later, he snarled under his breath in Malay. Panicking, Aziza's poise faltered, her eyes on the two guests staring back at her. Then she withdrew. Marjorie was left admiring the woman's native dress with its long green and turquoise creped chine tunic, a matching ankle-length skirt and a scarf tied tightly around her head and draped over her shoulders. The visitors were now shown the balcony. "Oh, this is heavenly, Bob," Marjorie exclaimed in delight. "I can see the jungle from far beyond." "Wow!" "Yes, Madam Wales," the host proudly chuckled, standing by her side, delighting in her childlike response. "We're very lucky to have a jungle for our garden." His face brimmed with a wide grin. "Isn't it lovely, madam? This veranda is very important for our women. We are Muslims, as you know. Here, at the side of the house, our women can have some privacy to enjoy both the sun and the breeze. Also, it is safe here, away from the snakes from the jungle." "Oh, don't worry, madam. There are no snakes in this house," he hastened to explain, seeing the look of horror on her face. "My mother always sat here, her favorite spot in the house, and told us stories in the afternoons whilst preparing vegetables for the dinner. You see, there is always a cool breeze up here. Madam, come and sit on the stool. Close your eyes and imagine that you are in my mother's days. Is my English okay? Come, madam. You won't fall." He patted the stool. "It's strong. Don't worry, it will not break. Women of all sizes have sat on it." He chuckled, this time his body doubled over. There was this big American lady. He stopped himself, drawing in his cheeks filled with silent laughter, remembering his manners. Marjorie politely looked away, not relishing hearing about the incident of the unfortunate American woman, and instead gazed at the huge flapper-like leaves of the tall trees. Robert placed his arm protectively around her shoulders. Aziza tiptoed back into the room, watched them for a few seconds, praying that they would not dawdle too long in the house. Abdul Hamid did not see her pull a small parcel tied in an old rag from under the mattress of the bed, and then scurry to stand outside the other door, softly calling, "Ibrahim, soon. I will get the key." Still on tiptoe, she went down to the kitchen and dropped the two small parcels containing money and jewelry into a small aluminium pot and propped it near the door. Hand trembling, she waited, listening to their footsteps. On the balcony, Marjorie wrinkled her nose. "I can smell wood burning, Robert. That Madam Wales, is our Aziza cooking the dinner down below?" Their host was quick to explain. "Come and see our lovely kitchen." "I am sure it's different from yours. We still like to use wood like the old days. In this house, we don't like modern cookers. You can taste our special stew later." Marjorie reluctantly got up from the stool. "I could sit here all day, Bob," she mourned, wanting to savor the scene for a few more minutes. They followed their host to the kitchen on a lower level, gingerly standing on the wooden steps. Marjorie wondered whether they could have strangers inspecting their house in Bangor like this. The thought horrified her. From the steps, their eyes skirted over the sooty paintwork, the kitchen items dangling from the walls, and the open fire with its aluminium cooking pot on top. Kitchen furniture consisted of two wall cabinets crammed with crockery, a stool, and one old wooden chair. Aziza stepped into the kitchen from the other little door, her face paling, at the two visitors staring curiously down at the piece of burning wood in her hand. Her face breaking into a polite smile and eyes steady, she put the burning log back under the cooking pot. Abdul Hamid addressed Aziza in Malay. Keeping her eyes on the fire, she muttered something back. Marjorie and Robert looked away, unable to understand but feeling the tension in the air. Their amiable host turned to them, pinning a bright smile to his face. "Here, sir, take a picture. You can show your friends back home what an old-fashioned Malay kitchen looks like." Marjorie now wished to be gone. The body language, the expression, and the look in the woman's eyes spelt to even the dimmest that they were intruders and had no right to be patronizingly surveying her kitchen and taking snaps. Marjorie caught her breath. "We have stepped into a domestic volcano," flashed the alarming thought. Immediately, she dismissed it as her imagination running away with her. Aziza was puffing air into the hearth to fan the flames. "Does it take a long time to light?" Marjorie asked, now disliking the host. "It wasn't he who had to cook this way." "Oh no, Madam Wales. Only a few seconds," Abdul Hamid breezily explained. "Come, let's go back to the main room upstairs." As they disappeared upstairs, he softly commanded Aziza in Malay. "Our visitors are going. Please bring them some soup and bid them goodbye." "To hell with them. I have said goodbyes to thousands already. What difference will it make today if I don't? Anyway, I'll do it later and in style. Give me the key and get them out of here, or you will regret it," the voice chilling. Abdul Hamid's poise didn't falter, but the body had stiffened. He would deal with her later. He followed the guests back into the dining room. The driver was still sitting with his head bent over the newspaper. "Please, let me offer you some refreshments. You must taste our warm hospitality." "Aziza," Abdul Hamid called from the door. "Please don't bother." Marjorie colored, hastening to add, "We already had a good lunch before we came," not wanting to see the woman again. "If you're sure," he looked pleased. Marjorie nodded her head vigorously. "Okay then. I wonder if you don't mind signing our visitor's book." He held up a pen and a thick register with frayed edges, evidently having passed many hands. Abdul Hamid proudly rifled through the pages, blotted with hundreds of black and blue signatures and addresses. "You see, I get visitors from all over the world and they all sign it. We will do the same and with pleasure, Mr. Hamid." Robert quickly obliged with his signature and then passed the book to Marjorie, exchanging a knowing glance as their host discreetly placed a small money basket full of currency notes on the table. Abdul Hamid peered over Marjorie's shoulder, pleased with her comment. With the register signed, he glanced at the money basket. "These, as you can see, are kind donations by people like yourself who visit my home." His hand was now in the basket, notes from different parts of the world. Then he felt the tissue paper come into his hand instead of banknotes. Anger shot through his wiry body. He would definitely be dealing with her today. Marjorie and Robert hid a smile. From what they could see, their Malay host was doing very well indeed. Robert took out a £10 sterling note from his wallet and placed it on top of the pile of other notes. The taxi driver smiled, inclining his head appreciatively. The host was now politely looking away, out of the window. Then he held out his hand to them. Marjorie was unsure whether to shake hands with him or not. As a Muslim, he would not normally be shaking hands with a woman. Instead, she offered, "Thank you for sharing your lovely home with us. It has indeed been quite an experience." "My pleasure, madam. I hope you have a safe journey back home. Please thank your wife for us," Marjorie added, watching the host's face with interest. Abdul Hamid politely inclined his head, smiled once again, and waved them off. "You know, Marjorie," Robert began as they reached their car, "I don't know how that woman can manage in that kitchen of hers. The smoke. I can smell it from here." "I told you, Bob." They turned to the patter of feet running from behind the house. It was the woman. Ignoring them, Aziza ran up the steps and stood in front of a highly embarrassed Abdul Hamid. Muttering and shaking her head at him, she shoved her hand into his trouser pocket. He grabbed her tightly by the wrist. She pulled away and ran down to the driver, speaking to him in rapid Bahasa Malay. "Please help me. I must get him out. The key, I need the key." Mouths parted, Bob and Marjorie looked on. "Key? From where?" the driver asked. "Look." She pointed down to the wooden platform. The driver's eyes widened in shock. Then Aziza rushed back to Abdul, this time managing to pull the key out of his pocket and ran into the house with the driver sprinting behind her. Ibrahim! Ibrahim! Panic-ridden, Aziza fumbled with the key in the lock. Throwing open the door, she ran to the man lying on the floor in the small bedroom. Please help him. He can't walk. She urged the driver as he gripped the man from under his armpits to pull him up into a standing position. Resting his arms on their shoulders, they dragged him out of the house with a burst of energy and hobbled down the steps. Abdul Hamid looked on, horrified. They laid the man on the dry grass away from the house. Aziza cradled his head in her arms, tears streaming down her line-creased cheeks. Aziza! Abdul Hamid shouted from the porch. Come and take a last look at your precious show house, Abdul Hamid. She jeered in return. What are you saying, you mad woman? Body shaking with hysteria, Aziza pointed to the house. Abdul Hamid scrambled down, 2 steps at a time. You mad woman! He cried, peering at the flames at the sides of the house. His worst fear realized. She had once threatened. Today she had done it. Quick! Water! It will all go up. Aziza! She looked on. He rushed to the water pump at the back of the house and soon appeared dragging a bucket of water. Too late. She watched him throw the water on the burning wall. The kitchen is on fire, too. I made sure of that. Bob and Marjorie remained rooted to the spot, unable to speak or move. Should they run and help their host? The woman had indeed gone mad. Abdul Hamid was back with another bucket, then stared helplessly at the flames greedily licking away at the front porch, coiling around the plant pots. The driver took the bucket of water and threw it on the flames. Bob, that man was inside the house. Marjorie at last managed to exclaim. Her husband nodded, bemused, looking around and then staring down at the woman squatting on the ground and muttering into the man's ears. Ibrahim, are you all right? Aziza tenderly brushed strands of his gray wet hair from his face. Why was he locked up? The driver whispered in Malay, standing beside Aziza. He locked him up. Aziza accused, pointing her finger at Abdul Hamid. Your husband? Why? No. The one low, because he is mentally retarded. The words jammed in her mouth as she pointed once again at the host. He married me off to Ibrahim so that he could have this house after our parents died in an accident. Dazed Abdul Hamid was watching his house go up in flames. The fire now gripped the upper level of the house. Enraged, Aziza got up and dashed to Abdul Hamid, poking him hard on the chest. You have robbed me of my home, my youth, my freedom, my life, in fact, made us prisoners of your greed and tyranny. Well, look, the voice shook with tears and hysteria. Well, now you can have it all. The ashes. Kedup is my husband. The other is my brother. He locks Ibrahim up every time visitors come, ashamed of his disability. Done it for the last 30 years. Aziza's dark eyes darted fire. For 30 years, the driver ejaculated. He is a man. Why does he let himself be locked up? You will always sit out on the veranda with your Coke. I promise. All day. If that is what you want, I'll see to it. My dear husband, she wept. Over him, eyes tender. With a wobbly smile, Ibrahim looked up into her eyes. Aziza pulled him up and let the driver help them into the car. Robert and Marjorie stepped aside, too afraid and embarrassed to say or to ask. They had simply become invisible. Is no one going to put out the fire? Robert finally ventured to croak as he saw the driver get into the car. It's too late, sir. There are no fire engines in this area. In any case, by the time they arrive, the whole thing will have disappeared. His eyes averted from his passengers, the driver looked at the burning building through his car mirror. Do you mind if I take this lady and the man to the hospital? He needs seeing to. Not at all. Marjorie quickly got into the car. Come on, Bob. But the host, Marjorie, we can't just leave him behind. Not like this. What is he going to do? Shush, just get in, Bob. She pulled her husband into the car and waited for the driver to explain. It was all too surreal for them. The driver was not in a mood to divulge anything, however. The woman had suffered enough indignities in her life already, than to have it capped it further by sharing it with these Western tourists. Ibrahim was belted into the front passenger seat. Aziza stiffly sat next to Marjorie. They had exchanged a quick nervous smile before Aziza gazed out of the car window. The driver turned to his other passengers. His eyes not quite meeting theirs in the driver's mirror, he asked, "Sir and madam, would you want to try the scorpion farm now or the Bata Caves?" Bob and Marjorie turned to look back. Their Malay host stood stooped against the tree, staring at the remains of his house. "Don't worry, sir, I will go back for the host later," the driver reassured. "Marjorie, did we do the right thing leaving that poor man?" 3 miles later, Marjorie whispered, "Did that really happen, Bob, or did I imagine it all?" Her husband was staring at the wobbling head of the passenger in the front seat.